The gavel struck once, echoing through the packed Manhattan courtroom like a warning no one could ignore. Claire Sutton stood frozen under the harsh lights, her cleaning uniform still smelling faintly of bleach, her palms damp as she faced the millionaire CEO she had just accused. Reporters leaned forward. Attorneys whispered. Michael Dempsey stared at her as if the ground beneath him had finally cracked open. She hadn't come here to destroy him. She had come because of a single document slipped into her locker on a cold winter night. A document that carried a secret from the past that neither of them was ready to face. And as the judge demanded the truth, Claire realized this moment wasn't just about corruption or corporate lies. It was about identity, abandonment, and a choice that would change all their lives forever. A cleaning lady, a powerful man, and a hidden pain spanning 22 years were finally colliding in one life-changing story. Before we begin this emotional story, tell us in the comments from which city you are watching, and don't forget to leave your like to keep following us. The courtroom in downtown Manhattan felt colder than the February wind outside. Fluorescent lights hummed above the long wooden benches, flickering just enough to sharpen the tension that had already pressed itself into everyone's breathing. Reporters filled the first rows, their phones raised like a forest of judgment, lenses pointing toward the man in the navy suit. Michael Dempsey, the millionaire CEO whose empire had begun cracking long before he even admitted it to himself. But the room didn't revolve around him today. It revolved around the woman standing at the witness table. Claire Sutton kept her back straight, her hands clasping the crumpled statement she had rewritten 5 times the night before. Her cleaning uniform looked painfully out of place among polished shoes and $1,000 ties. Yellow gloves still hung from her pocket, a reminder of who she was in a room where nobody wanted to hear her, except the judge and maybe the truth itself. Michael's eyes flicked up at her, a mix of disbelief and dread tightening his jaw. He had seen her dozens of times in the corporate hallways, pushing her cart past conference rooms filled with secrets he thought were safe. He never imagined she had heard anything. He never wondered what people like her noticed while walking silently among the powerful. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Sutton, you may proceed." Claire inhaled carefully, her fingers trembling just enough for Michael to notice. The silence between them felt like a held breath, stretching, threatening to snap. Behind her, camera shutters clicked. She raised her chin, her voice quiet but piercing. I'm here to tell the truth." Michael's pen slipped from his hand and rolled across the table, stopping just before the edge. He didn't pick it up, because he knew. If Claire spoke, really spoke, everything he had built could collapse. She unfolded the paper slowly. The court leaned in, waiting for her next words. Claire didn't begin reading right away. The paper shook faintly in her grip, not from fear alone, but from the weight of memories she had kept buried for too long. The courtroom lights cast a soft sheen across her face, revealing the exhaustion beneath her resolve. Those late nights cleaning empty offices, while the city outside kept moving without noticing her. "I worked the night shift on the 32nd floor, she finally said, her eyes fixed on the page, but her voice reaching far beyond it. "Most people forget I'm there. They talk freely. They assume I can't hear or won't understand or won't matter." A murmur rippled through the attorney's row. Michael shifted in his seat, staring at the tabletop, elbows tense. His attorney leaned in, whispering something urgent, but Michael waved him off, gaze locked on Claire like he couldn't afford to blink. Claire continued, her tone tightening. "On December 14th, I heard Mr. Dempsey speaking with 2 board members. They were discussing financial records, altered ones, documents meant to hide major losses. They said investors didn't need the truth yet." Michael's breath caught. She heard that. A reporter in the front leaned forward, the click of his camera punctuating her words. "And when I accidentally knocked over a recycling bin outside the conference room," she said, swallowing hard, "they saw me. Mr. Dempsey told me not to repeat what I'd heard. He said people like me depend on staying invisible." Michael's head lifted sharply. "Claire," he began, voice cracking before he could stop it. The judge raised a hand. "You will remain silent, Mr. Dempsey." Claire steadied herself, meeting Michael's eyes for the first time. There was no anger there, only disappointment, something heavier than blame. "I wasn't invisible," she whispered. "I was just trying to survive." Her fingers tightened around the statement, and I can't stay quiet anymore." A soft gasp floated from somewhere in the gallery. Michael exhaled sharply, his shoulders sinking as if the truth she carried had just begun crushing him from the inside. The judge leaned forward, pen poised. "What exactly did you hear next, Miss Sutton?" Claire lowered her paper, preparing to reveal the part she had feared the most. Claire didn't look at her statement this time. The truth had lived inside her long enough that speaking it felt less like remembering and more like finally exhaling after months underwater. "What I heard next," she said carefully, "was Mr. Dempsey admitting that the losses weren't just financial mistakes. They were the result of a decision, one he made alone." Michael's fingers curled into a fist on the table, knuckles whitening. The court waited, motionless. Claire's voice softened, but the softness only sharpened the tension. He said he couldn't risk the truth coming out because it would destroy not just the company, but the people around him. He said, "If this leaks, I lose everything. My family, my reputation, everything I've tried to rebuild." A quiet stir passed through the gallery. Michael closed his eyes, jaw trembling ever so slightly. Those were his words, and he knew exactly why he'd said them. But Claire wasn't finished. "I wasn't supposed to hear that," she continued, "but once I did, I couldn't forget it. It followed me home. It stayed with me at the bus stop in New York during those cold winter nights. It made me wonder if keeping someone's secret can be worse than exposing it." Her breath wavered, not from fear now, but from the memory of loneliness she carried each night after leaving the corporate tower. "Miss Sutton," the judge said gently, noticing the shift in her tone, "why did you wait until now to come forward?" Claire lifted her eyes, a small tremor returning to her hands. "Because I needed to know the truth about something else, something personal, something connected to that night." Michael's head snapped up. Claire continued, her voice almost breaking. "A week after hearing that conversation, someone left an envelope in my locker at the community center where I volunteer. No name, no message, just one document." She reached into her coat, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a folded paper. Michael stared at it with hollow disbelief. He knew that paper, and he knew exactly what she was about to reveal. The document in Claire's hand looked fragile, as if the paper itself carried a breath it was afraid to release. She held it with both hands, careful not to crease it, careful not to let the courtroom see how deeply her fingers shook. The judge nodded for her to proceed. "It wasn't something from the company," Claire said quietly. "It wasn't about money or the altered records. It was personal." Michael swallowed hard, his throat tightening as though the air had thickened around him. He already felt the shape of the truth forming, and the dread of it pressed against his ribs. Claire unfolded the paper with slow precision. "It was a hospital intake form," she continued. "From 22 years ago. A maternity ward in Brooklyn. A newborn placed in temporary care, unnamed, except for one note scribbled at the bottom." The gallery leaned closer, breaths barely audible. Claire's eyes flickered to Michael, just a fraction of a second, but heavy enough to anchor the entire room. The note said, "Mother unable to provide, father unaware." Michael's face drained of color. His attorney whispered his name, but Michael didn't seem to hear anything anymore. Claire exhaled, a shaky breath she had held for years. "I never knew anything about my biological parents. The foster homes told me the file was incomplete, but then this shows up in my locker. No explanation, no signature, just a truth someone thought I should have." She turned the form so the judge could see. And the handwriting on the note matches Mr. Dempsey's signature from the early 2000s. Gasps broke across the courtroom. Michael stood abruptly, the chair scraping behind him, his voice cracking open with raw panic. "Claire, you don't understand." "Sit down, Mr. Dempsey," the judge warned, but his voice sounded distant compared to the emotional storm brewing between them. Claire held the document closer to her chest. "I came here because I needed to know why my file ended up in your hands, and why you hid it." Michael stared at her, not as a CEO, not as a man cornered, but as someone who had just been stripped of every defense he had left. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The truth had finally caught up to him, and it wasn't done. For a long moment, the courtroom felt suspended. No sound, no movement, just the heavy trembling of a truth that neither of them could outrun anymore. Michael rubbed his temple with the back of his hand, the gesture small but cracking with exhaustion. He looked less like a millionaire CEO now and more like a man who had been running from a shadow that finally stepped into the light. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Dempsey, if there is something you wish to clarify, now would be the appropriate time." Michael didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on Claire, studying the uncertainty trembling beneath her composure. Not anger, not accusation, just a woman searching for the missing pieces of her own life. He finally stepped forward, ignoring the whispers from the attorney's table. "I wasn't supposed to see that file," he said quietly. "It found me the same way it found you." Claire blinked, thrown off by the crack in his voice. Michael continued, his words dragging memories behind them. 22 years ago, I was lost. The kind of lost you don't admit in public, not even to people you love. I wasn't the powerful man you see now. I was a struggling student with 2 part-time jobs and a relationship that ended too fast. She left without telling me she was pregnant, and by the time I found out, his voice faltered. It was too late. The adoption was already in motion. The courtroom went silent. "I tried to stop it," he whispered. "I tried to find her, the mother, the child, anyone, but everything was sealed. I never even knew a name. Only that note, something a nurse scribbled when the mother refused to speak to me." Claire's fingers tightened around the document, breath catching. Michael looked down, shame etching into the lines around his eyes. "When your file showed up at the office, I didn't hide it to hurt you. I hid it because I didn't know if it was real, and I was terrified that if I looked too closely," he swallowed hard, "I'd discover that the worst mistake of my life had a face." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Dempsey, are you implying that Miss Sutton may be—" Michael's voice broke before he finished. "I don't know, but I've feared it every day since that file appeared." Claire's breath trembled. The room felt impossibly small. Claire felt the air leave her lungs as if someone had pressed a hand against her chest. The courtroom blurred at the edges, shapes melting into one another, while her heartbeat pounded like footsteps running through a long, dark hallway inside her. She wasn't ready for this. Not this possibility, not this fracture opening beneath her feet. "I'm not saying she is," Michael added quickly, his voice shaking. "I'm saying I never stopped wondering." Claire's nails scraped lightly against the wooden witness stand. "All this time," she whispered, "you walked past me in those hallways, and you wondered if I was your daughter." Michael nodded once, the smallest movement carrying unbearable weight. "I didn't want to disrupt your life," he said. "You seemed strong, independent. I didn't want to barge in and claim something I had no right to claim unless I was sure." Her throat tightened painfully. "You had no right to hide this from me either." He flinched, because she was right. The judge gestured for the courtroom to settle, though no one had moved. "Miss Sutton, would you like a brief recess?" Claire shook her head. She couldn't pause this moment. Pauses only made the truth heavier. "What I don't understand," she said, voice trembling, "is why my file appeared in your office and then nothing. You didn't look for me. You didn't ask. You didn't tell me. You let months go by." Michael's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with a man's silent confession of failure. "Because I was ashamed. Because I've lived my entire life building things, companies, reputations, to forget what I lost. And when I saw that file, I realized I had built everything on top of a wound I never healed." A flicker of sympathy crossed Claire's face, uninvited and confusing. "And the financial fraud?" she asked, voice tightening. "Was that also about protecting this secret?" Michael exhaled, shoulders collapsing. "No, but the fear of losing everything again made me justify things I shouldn't have." Claire looked down at the document, her past, her identity, her unanswered questions. "Then tell me the truth," she said. "All of it. Right now." Michael opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a voice from the back of the courtroom cut through the silence. "I can answer that." Everyone turned. A woman stood there, one Claire had never seen, but whose face carried a long-buried resemblance neither Claire nor Michael could ignore. The woman stepped forward, her heels echoing against the marble floor like a series of quiet confessions. She wore a dark green coat, slightly frayed at the sleeves. and her hair was swept back loosely, strands falling across a face that carried years of regret. Claire stared at her, searching for recognition she had never had the chance to develop. The judge looked over his glasses. "State your name." "Marianne Hale," the woman said. Her voice was steady, too steady for the storm in her eyes. She turned toward Claire. "And I'm your biological mother." Claire froze. Michael's breath hitched so violently the microphone captured it. Marianne continued, though her hands shook as she gripped the railing. "I left you because I wasn't stable, I wasn't safe, and I lied to Michael. I told him the baby was gone before I even gave birth. I didn't want him tied to me. I didn't want either of us trapped." Michael's head dropped, pain tightening his entire frame. "I hid your file," Marianne said, her voice cracking. "But when I saw you months ago cleaning the lobby of the same company he runs, I panicked. I knew you deserved the truth, but I couldn't face either of you, so I sent the file. Cowardly, I know." Claire's knees weakened. The judge gestured for her to sit, but Claire stayed standing, gripping the edge of the witness stand. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why come here today?" "Because you came forward with courage I never had," Marianne said. "Because you spoke the truth I buried. And because the lies he told, and the lies I told, they've both hurt you." She turned to Michael, tears forming. "And you. I stole your chance to be a father." Michael's voice cracked. "Why would you do that to her? To me?" "Because I didn't think either of us deserved her," Marianne said softly. The silence that followed was overwhelming, years of abandonment, pain and longing suspended in a single breath. Then Claire did something none of them expected. She closed the document, set it gently on the table and said with a trembling clarity, "I think we stopped lying today." Michael lifted his eyes. Marianne covered her mouth. The judge looked between them, sensing the shift. This wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was the beginning of a reckoning, and the first fragile step toward forgiveness none of them had imagined. Months after that day in court, the truth settled into their lives with the quiet force of a winter storm melting into spring. The charges against Michael led to a full investigation, but what surprised everyone was how openly he cooperated. No lawyers shielding him, no polished speeches. He faced the consequences with a humility that stunned the business world. And when reporters asked why, he simply said he was learning what accountability looked like for the first time. Claire didn't forgive him immediately. Forgiveness wasn't a switch. It was a slow, fragile bridge, built one honest conversation at a time. She met with him at the community center on Saturdays, sitting at a metal table with 2 coffees between them. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. But the silence was no longer heavy. It was healing. Marianne came too. Not every week, and not without trembling hands, but she came. She apologized more with presence than with words, and gradually, Claire stopped feeling like she was choosing between 2 versions of a broken past. She was choosing what came next. One morning, months later, the community center unveiled a small framed picture in its hallway, a photo of Claire holding a stack of donated coats, smiling at a group of struggling students she now mentored. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Second Chances Project, founded in partnership with Claire Sutton and Michael Dempsey." No one looking at it would understand the history behind that moment, the pain that led to it, or the redemption quietly stitched into every letter. But Claire did. Michael did. Marianne did. And that was enough. They weren't a traditional family. They weren't trying to erase the past. They were learning to honor it through honesty, through dignity, through the small act of kindness that first brought Claire to the witness stand. And though the future still carried uncertainties, one truth finally felt steady. Some stories don't end in forgiveness. They begin with it. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this heart-touching story. Tell us in the comments which moment touched you the most. Subscribe and turn on the bell to receive more stories that inspire and transform. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of kindness, dignity, and family. And thank you for being part of this community that believes in stories with soul.